All right, welcome back everyone to another episode of Taming the Perilous Sky's 100 Days to Launch. 100 Days to Launch is the YouTube docuseries where we track a debut author's journey from finished manuscript to a full-on multimedia release. Every week we check in here with Dr. Phil Marshall to speak with different experts, cover different topics on that particular journey. You can also check in with Phil every day on his socials, which are listed below, to see, the many, many adventures and misadventures of bringing your debut novel to the marketplace. And so today we are just here to talk a little bit about research, about expertise, about what goes into, writing the novel, really beyond just having the idea. And so, Phil, on a few of our other conversations with some of our experts, you've talked about some of the experts that helped, bring the book to life on your end. It sounds like there's kind of a lot of little, niche, components and audiences and people from different walks of life that, bring this big world and this big story to life. And so, Joshua and I here from the content team, we'd love to just hear a little bit about that and kind of pick your brain on the research that went into the book.
This is a big topic if you're doing hard sci-fi, right? And so let's kind of talk about the setup. So I've got a story that takes place in 2076. It's after the theory of persistence and the subsequent invention of anti-gravity has transformed the world. The story is technological on the one hand, where a particular set of materials, shields the force of gravity and allows this transformative change in society. But then you've got each of the characters. Okay, now some are easy and some are more difficult for me to understand and me to really get into. And I don't need to research what it's like to be an elderly, flamboyant, inventor. Okay, because I know elderly people like my father, and I am a flamboyant gay inventor. At least I fancy myself as that, or I can imagine what it would be like to go to the extreme of that, which I hope someday to be able to do. And so that part's easy. But Jack's an urban guy, mild-mannered, loves his son. That's not elite. His mother is Brazilian though, so he's half Brazilian. She's Christian. She's very religious, and she speaks Portuguese in some little bits here and there. And so, okay, well, there's that. And then you've got the 9-year-old boy. What's it like to have a 9-year-old boy? And then you get into the White House, and you're in the White House. And so, what's it like to be when the shit hits the fan? You're in a major crisis. How's that handled at the federal level? And then you've got the Italians, and you've got astrophysicists, and you've got the damn prime minister of Italy and her science advisor. And how do they actually organize things? Like, how are they organized? Like, how do they do things? And then you've got the Catholic Church, and you've got the Duomo, and you've got the crypt under the Duomo. And what does that actually look like? And then you've got, what would the Pope do in this particular case? And then you've got actual sermons being delivered from a Catholic church, and I'm not Catholic. And so I've got to talk to priests. I've got to talk to a lot of priests. And then on top of all that, I've got the president's Hindu, and she shares Hindu, teachings and insights. And I'm not Hindu. I'm not Catholic. I'm not Hindu. And then I've got Hadas Kasim and Yogev, who work next to each other. She comes from a Palestinian family, but she is now a fabricist. And then you got Yogev Abraham, who's an Orthodox Jew. And so, what's that like? And how would the Jewish community or the Palestinian community respond to the fact that I combined into a unified secular state, Israel and Palestine, into something called Shalem, which stands for peace? Now, you wouldn't think that people get that upset about having a unified nation that's secular, that stands for peace in the future. But I don't know. So I had to ask.
Some questions.
And so now, how many experts did I have to actually track down? Well, you know what? It turns out I'm pretty lucky. So let's actually break it down. let's break it down into scientific and technological. Start with that. Then let's talk about political and, that. And then let's talk about cultural and that. So scientific and technological. I have quantum encryption. The cube is the controller of all aerial activity, and it uses a particular quantum encryption scheme. And Andrew, our Andrew spoken, told me when I was having such trouble. God, this was probably 2-3 years ago. I was having such trouble writing just getting through the meat of what happens. And he said, you'll never be able to finish this novel if you don't know what happens. I'm like, well, it's easy. I mean, what happens is it has to do with, and then I'd wave my hands and, use words and he'd sit there and he'd just say, no, like what? But then I figured it out. And quantum encryption, the use of polarized photons, which is a particular technology that exists that creates ones or zeros depending on the polarization angle of the photons. It's a BB84 protocol. And so I needed to learn more about encryption. Well, who do we know that knows encryption? Who's a hacker at heart? Who's the cryptologist amongst us? Brent Tucker. Okay, that's who. And so he reviewed all of my hashing algorithms and the use of the key in order to create the unbreakable hash, and so he was an expert on that front. So that was the quantum encryption. But then, and this is my favorite. I probably should end with this one, but I'm just going to say it now. My NASA physicist.
Yes, we've heard a little bit about your NASA physicist.
So
quite the opinionated person, but not necessarily where you would think.
There's a physicist who I adore and who I worship, and that's Sabine Hassenfelder. She's a German theoretical physicist. She's done a lot of work in loop quantum gravity, and she published a book called Lost in Math that that just was just a real bellwether moment for me to be able to grasp how the physics community approaches things. And she's very skeptical about the most recent generation of physicists and how they justify ideas for the purposes of getting academic payment. So I am a Patreon supporter of Sabina, and I pinged her, and so she made some suggestions on where I might look for expertise to be able to react to the theory of persistence. Now this becomes interesting because this isn't just fiction. This is the dang theory that started it all, that I came up with on the initial seed of it was on 9/11, and what I've been working on. And I've met with physicists I've met with physics instructors at Reed College. I have a friend of a friend who was actually a particle physicist at CERN, the particle collider in Europe. And so I talked with him decades ago about it. And the reaction was, well, I'm not a particle physicist. You need to talk to a particle physicist. Okay, so I go to talk to a particle physicist, and they say, oh no, you need to talk to a relativistic physicist. And so I'm like, okay, so I went back to the other guy. No, you need to talk to the particle physicist. So they get bouncing around. You need to talk. Oh, that's probably that domain over there. Or that's that domain over there. Okay, so finally, after all this, I got hooked into somebody who sells his time to review things like this. And I'm not going to say who it is, because he's an actual NASA physicist and has a lot of contract work that make it so I can't name him, and I wouldn't do that anyway. So what I did was I took the excerpts that contained the passages that were scientific, mathematically, quantum computing, or quantum encryption related. These are all areas that he understands deeply. Mathematical, scientific, the whole theory of persistence, with it, which is relativistic as well as particle. And so I took the excerpts from the book, and they were probably, I don't know, whatever, 25, 30. And so context was given, a little bit of context was given, but not a whole lot. They didn't send the whole book. I just didn't send the whole chapter. I couldn't expect somebody like that to read the whole thing.
Read the whole book, yeah.
So I set it up, right? So here are the excerpts, and he did not do that at all. He instead said, I really don't think you've set up this plot point very well, and your character development here seems to be particularly weak. I'm not really pulled into the story. And I realized, I'm like, he did not understand the concept of an excerpt. Like that was lost on him.
You just want him to check the science, right? Just check the science.
Just check this. And so he said, it really should be more like Star Trek. They always stick to, foundational principles. And really? Yeah. Warp speed, right? Transporter. Yeah. Sticking to hard science here, are we? Well, I can thank him, because on the cover of my novel, I was able to quote, "Yikes, actual NASA physicist." Because when the historian at the barn, which is where SAMCAM, the material combination that averts gravity, was invented, which is only 2 miles from here, by the way. The actual barn that I modeled after is 2 miles from here. And I had the historian sharing with the main character the invention of anti-gravity and how it works. He kind of goes into this little scientific, kind of thing about Higgs bosons and pion condensates. It's meant to be just like him going in deep on something that the main character's like, stop, like I can't absorb this, right? That's all it was that. And when he read that, he just put "yikes!" exclamation point. And at the time, I'm like, come on. I mean, it's poetic license. It's, and not only that, I am the moderator of the anti-gravity subreddit. I know what people talk about in the little dark corners, right? And they go into these little, the Higgs boson pion condensate thing is actually something that people talk about may actually be how that UFO that Bob Lazar, saw in person in Area 51, that, that's actually probably how it worked, is that, right? So it's not like I was just like word salad, you
did the research.
Yikes, actual NASA physicists. Thank you for at least that. What I ended up doing with him was I sent a spreadsheet. I said, listen, stop. I mean, I'm going to put every single sentence reference, and you're going to rate it as holds, or don't know, can't say, or no, it's wrong. And here's why. And tell me why. Okay. Anyway. So that was that. That was actually, Did
he do that? Did he do the spreadsheet?
Kind of, yeah.
Ish.
Yeah, it was helpful. I mean, yeah, it was helpful. I ended up using a different Cartesian coordinate system for galactic coordinates instead of just solar system coordinates. And that's important when probes are looking at the future fabric 24 hours ahead of where the Earth would be. So how do you actually measure where the Earth would be in 24 hours? Okay, like what are the coordinate system? How do you do that? How's it done? And so yeah, it was helpful. ChatGPT was more helpful in the end, I think, on that. But I had it check my work, and actually it didn't change really a whole lot, but it was helpful, more helpful than what's his name. Okay, so let's talk real quickly about some of the others. Okay, let's go to like political. Okay, sure. So what happens when shit hits the fan? It just so happens that I have a very close contact who leads the FBI counterterrorism effort at the CIA headquarters.
Wow. And
so we met a few times, and I was able to ask, like, what's it like when the shit, and I'm not gonna say he or she, they, right? They have been involved in some of the biggest shit ever to happen. You know, the stories you heard about, they were in there conducting that investigation, doing when, crisis hits,
Sure.
And so that was fantastic context for this. Okay. So moving on, beyond sort of political is cultural. So many different cultural and religious.
Yeah, it sounds like just a whole gamut of everybody.
Absolutely. So the Milan Duomo, I've been there so many times. And thank you, Victor, the tour guide, who just kept being my person that I went back to and supporting me with a lot more insight on the crypt of San Barromeo and the Winter Chapel and then the tunnel that leads from the Archdiocese offices to the South Transept. I have a video of walking of walking through that tunnel. I didn't take it, right? But my tour guide. And so that's like something nobody would ever know about or see.
Yeah, exclusive exit.
I when I got that, I'm like, I'm gonna fucking Dan Brown my ass off on this. This is gonna be so Dan Brown, it's nuts. And I did. I went way too far on the Milan Duomo, by the way. Like I remember Ellie Roth, who did my sort of first reads on stuff. I mean, God bless her for her patience. She read this and like, it's pretty self-indulgent, the chapter 15 with Marco going through the Milan Duomo. I know, but I love it so much. Anyway, so the Duomo, the crypt, the Archdiocese offices, I just got so many keen insights. And then, so now let's like other cultural stuff. So Brazilian, like Portuguese, like, okay, like my friend is Lynn Van de Graaff through writing like workshops. Does that name ring a bell to you? The Van de Graaff generator. Do you know what the Van de Graaff generator is? The Van de Graaff? Put your hand on the ball, sparks, hair.
Oh yeah.
That was his grandfather. Okay. And it just so happens he speaks Portuguese. So there we go. Lynn, shout out.
So an intersection of science, culture, language, all of the above.
Yeah, like a lot of fun. And then Catholic Church, lots of priests I talked to, here in Portland, in particular, and folks who actually went then to the Vatican to study. I mean, these are serious folks, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I got it all right, but I will say this: my friend Lou, shout out to her, because she read my passage of the church kind of leaning into the direction of this was vengeance by God, based on man, to punish us for man's hubris. And she corrected me right quick that because she was taught in Jesuit, the Jesuit teachings, like she knew it academically, she knew it deeply, and she very much corrected me on that, and so I learned a lot from her on Jesuit teachings, and so that was good. Hindu friends who are Hindu, who read the passages, gave feedback, really good insights on that. I hope I got that at least partially right. Muslim, Jewish, I mean, I had individuals locked in on all these things to react to, and so that was just it was a hell of a journey on all that. Have I left anybody out? I don't know. Probably did. Probably left out 20 people, but there, I've been talking forever. So what comes to mind on all that?
Definitely just the depth of research is, well, A, it's impressive, but B, it also shows that you're trying to create a fully grounded world here. This isn't playtime, as playtime's great, but this is, you want this rooted in this world, in this reality. And the only way to do that is to have that authenticity that only an expert can lend or advise on. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. And you pretty much checked all your boxes, no matter who read it from any of those disciplines would, where cultural aspects would go, okay, this is the real deal.
Yeah. I think kind of jumping off of that, what really struck me is, obviously you're talking about hard sci-fi, right, as the kind of core of it, where it's like, okay, I want the theoretical science to work, but you're also kind of talking about, like, I don't know, hard socio-political, not fantasy, right, but sort of, right? There's an imagining of, obviously you said this kind of unified nation of Israel and Palestine and things like that. Like you're
It's
changing.
pretty utopian. Yeah, I paint
Yeah.
that anti-gravity and fuel-free energy, so basically free energy, that combination reversing climate change, socio-political boundaries have gone away because you've got free trade and travel, basically, right? And
Right.
so yeah, it's just, it's lollipops and rainbows and unicorn farts, basically. So yeah.
And I think that's really, unique and amazing, because it's not just the science. It's like, what does the science beget, really? Like you're asking these questions beyond just that, kind of what you need for the story. And I think that's pretty fantastic. I think, Phil, as we kind of, to bring it back home to our debut authors out there in the world that we're all,
yes.
We're trying to speak to, tips and tricks or, lessons learned. I guess, something I'll often ask writing students or film students, it's like, hey, if we were to do this all over again, what would you do different? And then that usually kind of lends itself to some kind of takeaways. So I feel like something like that might be useful to the people out there who again might have something like this in the back of their mind.
Sure. But what I was faced with, you're not faced with anymore, because I didn't have ChatGPT when I started this journey. Right? 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. It didn't exist. And so all that foundational work that I did kind of the old fashioned way. I found people, I knew people, I asked people. And so now you can do a lot of that research on ChatGPT. But then again, I don't know. I mean, I do use ChatGPT, and I use deep research on ChatGPT to answer, deep questions. But I don't think you can get as good a perspective there, because it's blending everybody's perspective, right? It's kind of blending the zeitgeist as opposed to one particular point of view angle on something. And by the way, you can't use ChatGPT on a theory in gravitational physics that's never been uttered before, right?
No,
So I mean, and so but I will say things on like the BB84 protocol on polarized photons, checking that on the quantum encryption schemes, and even some of the things Catholic Church and like this was pretty helpful. But man, there's no, I don't know. I just don't think there's any real substitute for asking someone who's really there, who's been there, who's done it, like that, the FBI, CIA person, right? I mean, there's just no substitute for that. And so I guess the advice for debut authors, if my experience is anything, is maybe really should continue to lean on asking people, I think
there's
and
no substitute for that context, right? The context of information by itself is not everything.
Right. And the people that were there, they have the sense memory, right? They can tell you the smell, what the air quality was like, those little details that are hard to draw from a Wikipedia page or something like that, the sense memory. But what's also interesting is, after hearing, your approach, I would think, okay, if I'm going to go write my story, or a debut author is going to go write their story, I have to seek out all these professionals. How do I find them? But in your case, some of them were a degree of separation away. They just naturally were people you knew. For instance, your friend there who also spoke Portuguese. Mm-hmm. So, you pry a little bit and you find that your circle might have the answers.
He didn't actually just speak Portuguese. He was married to a woman from Portugal. And so it was cultural as well as language. And so, that was really, really interesting. Yeah. As far as like, go and seek, even if they're not 1 degree separation away, here's the thing. People are incredibly inclined to help. They just are. Mm-hmm. And if you ask, you're probably going to get them, find your own NASA physicist. I know I did. And it gave me some of the best stories.
And perhaps they could say yikes to your book too.
I'm just so glad. That's right. And maybe they will say yikes to your book too. Yeah, exactly. I just, you know
Well,
what, if
thank
this
you.
theory
Oh,
of
go ahead.
persistence has any legs whatsoever, has any real standing, I'll be the last one to laugh about all of it, right? But even if not, I've got a story.
A lot of stories, a lot of knowledge, I think that we probably didn't have at the beginning of the journey. Well, thank you, Phil, for sharing the stories.
Yeah.
Thank you, those of us who are joining us. We will be back next week with more topics, more of the journey. Keep checking in with Phil on socials, and we will see you next time on Taming the Perilous Skies 100 Days to Launch.
Professional audiobooks in a click. Spoken.